So happy Juneteenth.
Yes.
Black Freedom Day. Black American Freedom Day, at least.
Yes.
Yes. Always good. Always good. But we have a brand new topic today. The topic today is becoming a real estate investor, the planning and the pitfalls.
And pitfalls. Yeah.
And, of course, there's a lot of ways to approach that. There's a lot of ways to think about that. Let me just get our little banner up. So here's our title for today, Becoming a Real Estate Investor, the Planning and the Pitfalls. And what kind of got me thinking about this topic today was an article that I read in Forbes. And it was an article about reparations, actually. Speaking of Juneteenth and the end of slavery. And it said it was about new research showing that reparation payments could increase the life expectancy of Black Americans.
Crazy.
And such a great thing. I love the fact that this topic came up, and I love the fact that this is something that someone was looking into. But what I found interesting, so there were two things that I found interesting. So one was the amount. So the amount that they were saying was somewhere around $826,000. I forget if it was per individual or per family. Or per household. I forget what the exact amount was. They said that would be a life-changing amount. And one of the people that they spoke to was saying that he would use that amount to wipe out the six-figure debt he had on his home, and also to help his child, I think it was his daughter, have a higher quality education. And so it wasn't so much that the money itself, just having money, would change life expectancies, but the ways in which it would be used would be how it would have that effect on people's life. And so the connection I'm making to this conversation today is that six-figure number, because he was talking about, using it to wipe out a six-figure mortgage. And so that got me thinking about one of the first points about, the planning around being a real estate investor. And that is, you are going to have a six or maybe even a seven-figure debt. Like, that's just the reality. And it's basically because, if you're taking out a mortgage, you're going to have to, of course, you'll have some left over, and that's going to be six figures, most likely for most people, six figures. Or if you amass a lot of real estate, it could rise into the seven-figure number as well. So I know that's kind of scary for some people, but also I don't know that people really think about it. I think they just think, I'm going to get a property. I'm going to have a property. It's going to make me money. But they also have to think about the debt service to that as well. And, just planning around that and just thinking about what that means to be in that position, but then also to have and carry that debt as they go along.
And I would like to just interject and actually make a connection between the two things you just described. One was a person who's probably describing the home they live in, carrying a mortgage there and wanting to wipe that out and use the rest of the funds or some of the remaining funds to pay for their child's education. And then the connection you're making about how that money could be used, which is to, yes, put money in real estate, but put money in real estate with a perspective of actually making return on that investment, not necessarily eliminating debt, but consciously taking on debt as a way to make money from that. So that's called leveraging. So owning a property that you live in is a form of investment, certainly. Hopefully it holds value. Hopefully it increases in value. So you benefit from the appreciation in the home's value. You build equity just by living in the property over time if it continues to increase in value. But there are also ways to make money beyond appreciation, beyond the value rising in time. And that is to actually strategically use debt to have a way of making income, or what we call passive income. So that's a fun way to think about. For me, honestly, if I was offered $825,000, I know immediately what I would do. I would buy 3 buildings, and I would buy 3 buildings that are worth each $825,000, putting down 25% on each building. And I'd still have a couple $100,000 left over to use for my reserve, my buffer. And so what we're talking about is taking an amount of money and tilting it up to be worth more in the near term and the long term. So that's the fun stuff.
Let me ask you this question, because I was asked this one time. So I found myself in a position several years ago where I had enough money where I could have purchased. So I did what you did. I took bits and pieces of what I had, and I bought 2 units. and I had some money left over. But one person who asked me, so it was a realtor who asked me, well, why don't I just put a lot down on one, put a lot down on one, and then just put it down a little on the rest, and then just not carry any cash for anything else. Like, so that's sort of the opposite of what you just did. But, why wouldn't you do that? Like, what would your thoughts be around that?
Well, I haven't done it yet, but I want to. So I'm like, let me vision and attract this reparations money. Let me get this 825 and begin to play with it. I think what that question lights up is comfort level with risk. And you think about risk in terms of time. Like, what do you need that money to do for you this year and the next 2 years versus 5 versus 20 or 30 years? So the longer span of time you have, the more you might be willing to take on certain risks. And so there's not a one way to leverage the money you have in a way that's successful or strategic. It really depends on the context, and depends on your priorities, and depends on what risks you can afford to take. If you have money in other places, then sure, you could spend all that cash in one way. But what I would say is you want to, think about distributing the risk. So that's why I would buy 3 buildings, because let's say the rent goes down in one location, but the rent is holding steady or going up in another. I'm spread. If there's some environmental catastrophe where one of my buildings is, I'm not having to wait for that building to be rebuilt. I am, to be making any rental income. I'm still getting income on the other buildings. So that's one of the key aspects of leverage, is actually spreading your money out, making it so that your renter, your tenant, is actually covering your costs and then some. And then the cash that you have in, you don't just think about that as money in your pocket. You think about that as more money to invest. You're saving some of that for your next building or your next project. You're saving some of that for renovations and improvements, upgrades. You're saving some of that for vacancies, for times in the season or in a market or during recession where the rent is not as strong, right? So you're actually thinking about all the ways to spread out the money. My goal is not to just decrease debt. You can functionally and strategically use debt. And I think that Black folks have reasons being conditioned in this economy and in US society to be wary of debt and to be frightened by it, because systemically, and historically, Black people have been manipulated around borrowing money. But if you can do it in a way that's informed and strategic, you can actually do very, very well with it without being taken advantage of. And so it's about being informed about how to do it well.
And when you say debt, so 2 things come to mind. One is the words that our guests today have told me in the past, which is the American dream is built on debt. And it took me a while to think about that and to sort of let that sink in. But I'm like, that makes a lot of sense. The American dream is built on debt. And that's true in so many ways. And I'm sure she'll have more to say about that when she comes on. But then the second thing I'm thinking about, and this kind of leads to the second of our talking points, is it worth it? Because some people have to think about that. Is it worth it to take on the debt? Is it worth it to, well, let me get into this point. So when we had our conversation at the summit not so long ago, after the Q&A, once the session was over, someone came up to me and he asked me, should I tap into my 401k? I think it was a 401k. Should I tap into my 401k or whatever retirement vehicle it was and use those funds in order to make a down payment on a property or to purchase a property? And so first I had to say to him, and I say this to everybody here, I am not a CFP. I'm not a certified financial planner. I cannot give you that kind of advice.
Any kind of financial planner.
Right. That is true. I'm not any kind of financial planner, so I cannot give that kind of advice. But what I asked him, and that's the question for this piece, is it worth it? Is it worth it to you? And so what I wanted him to think about was, he was young. I don't think he was even 30 at that time. I think he was 29, maybe he was just turning 30. And I told him, you have to think about the compound interest that you're going to have on that 401k or whatever it was. It was something that generates compound interest. And I said, think about that. Like, you're young, and the money that you would take out now, you're going to lose out on that compound interest, which will accrue over time, over the next, 39 years, 35 years, whatever it is. I forget what the number is that you can take out that money. And I said, whatever you need for a down payment is probably small enough that you
Yes.
can save up over the next 2 or 3 years and apply that to your down payment, and so that you don't miss out on both. You might have to delay your gratification a little bit in terms of real estate, in terms of getting that down payment and buying that piece of property. And yes, property will appreciate over the next 2 or 3 years, but you should still, I hope he will, but you should still be able to catch up at some point, or be able to accrue enough at some point where you can put that down payment on that property, get that down payment, put it down, get the property, and still not touch your 401k and not jeopardize some other part of your financial life. Because you don't want to sacrifice, I would suggest, you don't want to sacrifice one part of your financial life in favor of another.
And there also may be a middle path. And that's where it is important to be talking with a planner. And we actually will be bringing on at least one planner in the near future here on our podcast. So looking forward to that. And we can raise some of those questions there. I think it also depends on the market in which you're buying. And I think it depends on how much money you have in your 401k and how much you could pull out. So there are ways that it is strategic for someone, if they can't otherwise get a ground in a very expensive housing market, to pull money from there and put it into real estate so they can own the thing they live in, especially if they're not having to pull out a ton from their 401k. But so it's like it may not be as clean as an either or. It might be a combination. I often have clients borrow from their 401k short term and put money back. So there might be ways to play around with that in time as well. But I agree with you certainly about the compounding interest. But I'll also say in some markets, it is so expensive to be able to buy that it does take a long time to save in order to be able to buy, and so if you can say that you can keep building on that compound interest over time, but you pull out some in the short run to invest in the next thing. Because again, what we're talking about is not only distributing risk, but distributing your assets. And so if you can get a valuable asset in an expensive, sought after housing market, that's a really wise way to play with your money as well. And again, you're doing all of this by really thinking about the fine-tuned details of it by talking with a planner.
Exactly. So then one last thing, one other talking point before we bring in our guest. The third one is around something you mentioned earlier, which is around building a buffer. So don't forget to build a buffer. And again, a lot of people think, or, I've come across people who think, yeah, I'm going to buy this piece of property. I'm just going to get those rents. Things are going to be good. It's in good condition. We're just good to go. And of course, things happen, a tree limb may break, a water pipe may burst. You have to think about not just things after they happen, but what can you do for preventative maintenance? What can you do to make sure that you take care of your property in advance? But that's going to, of course, cost money. So you want to make sure you have some amount of money set aside for maintenance, so that when you think about, yes, I'm going to have this property and it's good to go. It's good to go because, not just because it's in good condition and all the screws are in the right place and you have the new roof on, but you also have money just in case that new roof springs a leak, or in case the water heater bursts and you need to replace it. And one of the things I remember saying at the summit is that when things break in a house, everything costs at least $1,000. Replacing a water heater costs at least $1,000. Replacing a leaky pipe costs at least $1,000. Replacing a toilet costs at least $1,000. And then when you get to bigger systems, so heating, air conditioning, roofing, then you're talking tens of thousands of dollars. So you've got to make sure that you have some kind of buffer put into place. Also a buffer for your taxes, a buffer for your insurance if it's not built into your mortgage payments. So, just really thinking about what are some of the additional things that go above and beyond just the purchase of the house itself.
And I would say, just to keep in mind too, because Derek, what you're trying to do is lay out realistic perspectives, like realistic frames of it's not just acquire a property and then you're done. You have responsibilities to have that property sustain well over time. Well, before you even get the property, you have to be able to prove worthy of buying and acquiring that property. So you have to be able to show funds. You have to be able to show funds not only for a down payment and for closing costs, but generally, depending on what your credit profile is, a lender is probably going to want to see at least 3 months, maybe 6 months worth of cash on hand that could cover your carrying costs, that could cover the cost of the mortgage, the interest, the taxes, and insurance. And so automatically, even to get the financing to acquire such a property, you need to show funds and have that reserve. And then you also want an additional reserve because again, if your investment property is not a single unit, it's not a townhouse or a single family, let's say it's a multifamily, let's say it's 3 units. Well, that's 3 heating systems. Mm-hmm. That's many sets of windows. That's multiple electrical panels. So you want to really be thinking in multiples and plan ahead, buffer, reserve, and that's where you have a sense of power and stability and control. And that's when it starts to get fun because you've thought out ahead about what could come and you're ready.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So I think we laid out a good introduction for our guest. I don't know, we'll see what she has to say. For today's guest, we have Wendy Desabaye, who is a friend of the show. She's a longtime friend of the show. She has over 25 years of real estate investment experience. She is someone who I do speak to on a fairly frequent basis to talk about real estate investing and some of the pitfalls, some of the ideas, some of the suggestions that I may need from time to time when it comes to some of the things that I need to think about when I'm investing in real estate. So let's bring Wendy into the show.
Hi.
Good to see you.
Good to be seen.
How's it going today?
Amazing. Amazing.
Thank you for joining us in this conversation.
Thank you for having me.
So,
never thought this would ever happen in my lifetime.
Really? I'm sure a lot of people have reached out to you about real estate investing and advice in the past.
True. Yeah, true. But I think I told you my story is I was an accident that became a hobby and then I turned it into a business. So
well, tell
I
us
can't
more.
say I didn't start out, I'm going to be an investor when I grow up and do all this. Basically, my then boyfriend and I bought a house together, fixed it, went to sell it because I did not like the location. It was next to a cemetery, which was beautiful, by the way. The cemetery was actually very lovely, but just didn't have a sense of life. So
Literally.
When we went to sell it and went to do taxes, and they explained that, long-term hold, short-term hold, all that, because we had it for about, I think, 4 or 5 years, and how much it appreciated. It was that light bulb moment where you're like, oh, I actually made money doing this? Like, oh. And we bought another house, turned it into condos, I learned about that the hard way, and just kept doing it. And it's like a drug. Once you start doing one, you start getting more involved, and before you know it, you're an addict. So
you're a long-time addict with a lot of wisdom.
Yes.
What were some of the things you picked up along the way?
Some of the things you guys touched on, having money in case of emergencies. We've had busted heating systems in the middle of winter. A frozen pipe that happened to get, luckily, because if it's on the street side of the meter, it's the water problem. It's the water company's problem. If it's on your side of the meter, it's your problem. Mm-hmm. Luckily for us, it wasn't the street side of the meter, so it became the water company's problem, and they fixed it. But I've had friends who didn't know that little rule. Mm-hmm. And if it's busted on your side of the meter, your problem. Mm-hmm. They'll fix it, but you pay for it.
Right.
So little things like that, electricals, trees falling, if it's in your neighbor's tree, if it's not, or it's your tree, whose problem does it become? Mostly contractors not showing up when it's convenient for them, charging you absorbent fees, basically holding you as a highway robbery. I mean, they basically stick you up sometimes if they know you have no other option, no choice. Luckily, go ahead.
So there may be contractors who come and watch the show from time to time.
Hey.
How do you work with them contractors? What kind of advice do you give to work with contractors to make life easier?
Definitely having a contract with your contractor. I mean, handshakes are great and everyone comes with a great open heart. Sure, I'll fix the porch for you for $4,000. And sometimes the stuff is out of his control. I mean, the contractor goes to Home Depot today, the price of lumber is, $4 a linear foot. 2 days later, it's $8. So things like that, can't be helped. But you've got contractors who, they come in and say, oh, it's $4,000. Then they make a mistake because they didn't measure properly and they cut too soon. So now you have to buy more wood to replace what they messed up. Or then their subs leave them. Because a lot of them will come and say, oh, I'll do it. But then they have their cousin, their uncle, their whatever come and do the actual job, which is not done to your specifications. So making sure you have a contract with your contractor that states these things, like if you make a mistake, you pay for it. Mm-hmm. If something happens and I don't like the way the work is done, how are we going to rectify that? And making sure it's a good, clean contract. And you could get those now on Google Docs and all those things. I mean, when we did it, it was a lot of handshake. 25 years ago, it was like, hey, Billy, can you do this for me? Now, you can get a good, clean contract and make them, it's a sign off, so it's legal. Mm-hmm. And everybody's happy.
Given the ups and downs of the market, given, both in terms of the cost of real estate, in terms of the interest rates, in terms of the cost of materials, what's kept you going over the past 25 years?
Well, when we buy now, we buy equity. We make sure we don't get emotional about it. That's the biggest mistake I think most people do when they invest. They see some things like, oh, I love this. I can make this into something on HGTV. And that's like the worst thing ever. They're not there for your emotion. You're not there because you love it. You're there because it makes good financial sense. So you're not going to go into a $1 million, like $500,000 neighborhood, for example, and try to buy a house for $700,000. That doesn't make sense. Mm-hmm. You want to buy it for at least $400,000 because now you have a little bit of equity. So if something does happen and you have to sell it quickly, you at least got something, to fall back on. What's kept us going because we've done this for a long time. So now we don't buy stupid. I'm sure Melony has seen those situations where my favorite, you go into a house and someone falls in love and they overbid on it. And then 6 months later, it's up for sale because they realize they're in over their heads.
I will say that does not ever happen with my clients.
But I'm sure you've seen it happen.
Oh, absolutely. It happens in the market. Yeah, people have to be rigorous. And I actually talk with people. This is a business proposition. Even if you're buying to occupy it as your primary home, this is a business strategy until you take ownership. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we've learned how to navigate the waters of what to buy and what not to buy. Yeah. What kind of work needs to be done, because a lot of times, you'll see these properties and they look beautiful, but it's like an onion. You take over that one layer and you see like, oh my God, there's asbestos and there's a heating system that doesn't really work properly. But the day you showed up, it worked. Mm. The home inspectors you sometimes get, they will, I don't want to dog them or say anything bad, but I've seen situations where someone takes a test online and they think I'm a home inspector, and I can tell you what you need done, but they've never had the real world experiences. And then they get there and they say stuff to you like, oh no, this heating system is great. I mean, you could see it has one leg and it's like dragging, but and then you buy it and then you realize, oh shit, no, it's not that great. But a home inspector's long gone.
What's paining me in listening to your examples, Wendy, is wow, if a buyer, even as an investor, even if you're buying this in an mostly unemotional way, completely bottoms line driven way, you benefit from having advising, because to be able to vet not only contractors, but vet your partners, vet home inspector and attorney partners for your transaction. Mm-hmm. Think about, for this kind of property, how much of a reserve might I need? For all like guessing, as I like to help people think, is to look for problems before we even think about submitting an offer. What are the potential problems? Let's put a dollar value to that. And what is therefore this property worth to you, given the kind of risk that it could potentially have? Buffer for that. So you're only pursuing a property where the risk actually makes sense for your risk tolerance and your cash position. And it's not about the cute factor. That's whether you're buying to own or occupy or to invest or a combination.
Absolutely.
You need advising. You really need advising. This is not TV.
And also, I mean, like you said, vet your advisors.
Yes.
I mean, a lot of time we try to get word of mouth referrals.
which is
But,
important. But that's still.
I mean, honestly, we didn't have Google when I started.
Yep.
I mean, we just mumbled through this stuff ourselves and figured things out. But now you've got Google. Google the person. Are they really a licensed professional?
Absolutely.
What kind of reviews do they have? And then read those reviews. Just because someone says something silly like, I don't like this person because her dress was ugly. That doesn't mean she's not qualified to do the job. But people will say petty shit like that. Oh, excuse me. Petty things like that when they leave a review. But vet those people. We've all heard the horror stories of the realtor who actually knew the people that were selling but didn't disclose that, and then you have all sorts of drama.
Mm-hmm.
And there are contracts out there. I think there are contracts out there where the realtor has to say that they are representing just the buyer, just the seller, or both. I don't know if that applies in every state or in every case, but I think in some places, is it Massachusetts, Melony, where they have to disclose that?
Right. It's not a contract, but it's a disclosure. They do need to disclose who they represent. It's a licensee disclosure for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also a lot of don't ask, don't tell in real estate.
Yeah.
Yes, it could be a buyer beware state. It's up to the buyer to do due diligence, and again, another purpose to have a good advising. Can I pivot a little bit? I want to ask you some questions, Wendy, because you have had such a long run with such a wide variety of acquiring and turning property. I actually don't know how much property you've kept as rentals, but I've seen your projects that you've flipped for resale. Can you talk a little bit about how you've made the determination on a project basis of, is this going to be something I'm going to buy and hold long term, buy and hold for short term, and then sell later, or keep for myself? Like how have you thought about these properties over time?
Truly, it's a combination of things. So using Boston as an example, because that's where we know. I've generally lived in the Jamaica Plain, Roxbury neighborhoods. For me personally, because I travel, I like the airport, and those neighborhoods are closer. So like if I find something like, for example, Hyde Park has been very good to me over the years. In Hyde Park, there have been singles that we flipped over, and we just flipped them. We've also bought beautiful triples that we've turned into condos there. But like that neighborhood, I know I wouldn't live there personally because for me, it's not convenient, but not just because the neighbor's not good. Hyde Park has been very good to me. It's just really, it's a combination of things. Is it time for me to move from my own personal residence to take advantage of the tax break?
Yeah.
It's within that time frame, and I find something beautiful in Roxbury, guess where I'm going?
Yeah.
Or even Dorchester, I've done that too. So it depends on where I am in my my life, if I'm going to keep it for myself personally. For the investments where I'm going to hold them for rentals, I mean, am I buying, a $300,000 building in a $500,000 neighborhood that I know, okay, great, it takes me $20,000 to get it up to like habitable standards. Mm-hmm. So, I'll refinish the kitchen, the bathrooms, and it's functioning for common or for new use.
Yeah.
Back in the day, you'd have these homes, it's got 9 bedrooms, but only 1 bathroom.
Yeah.
So I've now reconfigured it. So now it's up to, newer standards. If I got it at a good enough price and I know the rents in that neighborhood are high enough, I'll keep it for at least a year or two for the long-term hold. Mm-hmm. But again, it's a numbers thing. But if I got a house we found one once in Dorchester near Ashmont, $700 for it. Yeah. And by the time we started, that was a 3-family. By the time we started finishing all the work, we could sell those floors each off over $700. Guess what I do?
Yeah, of course. Mm-hmm. And it seems like you're saying at minimum, you are bringing something up to what you would call a habitable standard. So that probably is updating some systems, maybe replacing windows, insulating. But it also sounds like there are instances where you're adding value. You're making the layout more functional and contemporary for what the current rental market or buying market might expect for paying premium. And so you might be adding a bathroom or adding a half bathroom. You might be splitting up a large room and turning it to 2 bedrooms. You might be creating an open floor plan in a kitchen and dining area so that you can use another room that would have been a dining room as a bedroom. Like
Exactly.
Your maximum square
We don't
footage.
live that formally anymore where we have, I mean, you've got the homes in Boston that have the closets that are size of, they're just tiny.
Yeah.
And I mean, I won't bore you that story why they're there, why it's that way. But now, people love walk-in closets.
Yeah.
People love large closet. They like open floor plan kitchen. The entertaining between even the hot thing is outdoor living.
Yeah.
Just because you live in the city doesn't mean you can't have a beautiful outdoor space.
Absolutely.
And tying all that into the kitchen and the
outdoor
area. Yeah, it's just one big.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So so we think a lot about that. And also, again, buying something that makes sense for us.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to buy in a neighborhood. I have a rule. I do not buy in neighborhoods that I personally will not live in. I don't buy in areas that I personally will not live in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because if something happens, I got to sell my other house in Roxbury and move to this place. I want to be able to be comfortable there.
Appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense.
But that's giving you a lot of control, a lot of maneuverability. Like all around, again, you're spreading risk.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And for me, it's a business. So when I go into it, it's not, it's not something like, oh, this is cute, I can make it work. But I have to think that if something happens on one side, can I carry it to the other side, as you were saying earlier?
Mm-hmm. So we are coming close to time, but I do want to ask one question for all of us to answer, because this show, we really are dedicating pretty much to Black and brown folks who want to get into real estate, or who are in it and want to own more real estate. So we've been speaking fairly generally about real estate, the pitfalls, the preparation for it. But as we think about the Black and brown communities, are there any thoughts you have that you would want to put out there? So, and I'll be happy to start. So what I've been thinking about, and what I have come across a bunch of times, is people hesitate. They, of course, buying property can induce some nerves. It can make people nervous because it's a big investment. It's a lot of money. You're signing your name on a document that commits you for 30 years. And so people hesitate. And by hesitating, they don't get into the game at all. Even if they are educated and they have the finances and they have the ability, they hesitate and they don't get into the game. And by doing so, they miss out on markets. They miss out on opportunities. And then, 6 months, a year, 2 years later, they come back and say, how do I get into the game? It's like, well, why didn't you do it before? So for me, I would say, don't hesitate. Like there's never a right time. There's never a perfect time for anything, really, anything. So, if you're thinking about getting into real estate and you're watching this show, you're talking to other people, you have the finances, you have the education, you have the connections, start. You don't have to buy the largest piece of property. You can start with a condo. You can start with a condo somewhere that's manageable, where part of the maintenance and part of the taxes and part of the other things are taken care of for you. And then you can learn from that and then grow your business, grow your opportunities from there. But basically what I'm saying is don't hesitate.
Appreciate that.
And I would add to that, it doesn't have to be in your backyard. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of, yes, if you live in Boston, it's a very expensive market, but guess what? There are markets all over the world. Mm-hmm. Talk to your tax person about how it can and can't be done as far as you're doing your taxes. As we said, there's no financial people here, but it doesn't have to be in Boston. It could be anywhere. Rhode Island is beautiful.
Oh my goodness. Absolutely. I'm having that conversation with so many clients right now about, can they buy in a market where they would get a building for half of what they would spend in Boston, but where the rents are similar, and so you're really trying to figure out how to maximize your return. I would say, in terms of thinking about Black and brown folks, and when you say that, I immediately think of first generation people. I'm first generation. Wendy, I'm not sure if you're an immigrant or child of immigrants.
Yeah, I'm first gen.
Yes. And that like, I know I grew up in a household with a mentality of that you should own what you have. And so buy a property at minimum, learn a trade and buy a property. That's what I was raised with. But to understand that, I think often immigrants can come with a mindset of being scrappy and being willing to take risks because they had to take risks to get here. And so it's like, can I buy a little piece of the American dream? Can I buy something and hold it over time? And if we think about a lot of neighborhoods that are turning right now on the coasts, whether you're talking about New York City, Boston, San Francisco, a lot of those neighborhoods that are turning, that are gentrifying, are neighborhoods where immigrants settled and had a piece of something, even maybe opened a small business and held on to it for 30, 40 years, and now it's turning. So what I would say is for us as brown folks and Black folks to try to think about the long term, the big game. And yes, take a small risk now, a calculated risk where you're getting advising, you're getting help, you're actually thinking about it, but you step in, because if you think about the long term and the impact that it can have for your family and the generation after you, it's so much more significant than the small risk you might take now. And so just think about, as Derek said, if you even look back 5 years in all these regions that I just mentioned, property values have doubled in some places.
Mm-hmm.
Over a decade, and that you're not getting access to that, but also in the same time being priced out of these communities. No. If there's a way to get access, even if it's not in the city you live in, but invest in another market somewhere in the U.S., it's absolutely worth strategizing and figuring out a way to do that. And actually, I also like to plug, I'm actually always happy to help people think about that. I may not be in your market, but I very likely know other advisors within the Sotheby's International Realty Network who can actually sit down and have a thoughtful conversation and brainstorming process with you. So get the help and get started.
Yeah.
And another plug for us is that we will have another realtor from another market on the show at some point. So if you are thinking about buying in another market, particularly in another state, we're not yet ready to talk about buying in other countries.
But it's on our minds.
It's on our minds. It's on our minds. It's on all of our minds. Everybody here. We're thinking about it. Yeah. And thank you for this conversation. This was great. Great having you on here, Wendy. Hope to see you again.
Yes. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. And for those of you who are watching, if you enjoyed the show and you have any questions or comments, please leave comments down below. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button so that you can find out when the next episode drops. But for today, that's it for the Black Landing Forum, and we'll see you on the next episode. Take care, everybody.
See you then.
Bye.